Tactician players get a bad rep because of their tendency to take charge, or to become a quote-unquote leader. Is there a place for leaders or tacticians in a D&D playgroup? In my opinion, absolutely. What do you think? Let everyone know in the comments. By the end of the video, I hope I'm able to affect your perception of tacticians and leadership somehow. Hey my fellow adventurers in agility. A bit more than 8 years ago, Matt Colville created a video about the different kinds of players. In it, he describes the Tactician, players who want to min-max your adventure and plan a lot. They want the team to do the optimal thing. Winning for them means executing their plans and succeeding if the dice gods will it. Therefore, they tend to want to lead. It's important to understand that the person who is exclusively one kind of player is exceedingly rare. These player types are stereotypes, showing someone's tendencies but not their totalities. In fact, it's likely that every player relates to each player type to varying degrees. Players who resonate with the label Tactician probably have that stereotype dominating their mix. And even if you consider yourself more of an actor or a storyteller, you may still have some tactician tendencies too. Cards on the table, I think tacticians are great. First, as a DM, having a tactician in my group means someone is thinking of my game outside the gaming session. This makes me feel good inside. Secondly, as Matt said, tacticians often lay out plans. And to me, plans mean direction and action. It means a push will come from the player side of the DM screen rather than me having to spend the effort pulling the group along the adventure. Like I said in my video about user stories, if you have PCs with their own goals, you've hit the jackpot. But what about from the player side? Well, how many of you can relate to having a game session where the DM tries to give you free rein, and your group spends most of the time floundering around doing nothing? Not role-playing, mind you. Role-playing is not doing nothing. What I mean is a group having no direction. Either nobody steps in to take point, or everybody pulls in totally different directions, and you don't get anywhere. To me, having a good tactician in the group means having someone who can facilitate to have a cohesive plan. Someone who can help the group pull in the same direction. As I was making this video, my wife asked me, are leaders good in D&D? Since a majority of groups play for fun, won't the presence of a leader make the game decidedly unfun? Who wants to report to a boss when they're playing a collaborative game? My gut told me that if murder hobos had a place at a D&D table, then surely tacticians or leaders also do. But right then I didn't have the words to explain my position. Now I do. Aside from the Wang Rod, I believe every player type brings something valuable to a D&D group. For tacticians, it's their tendency to take charge, to lead. What a loaded word. Matt Colville said he loved having these types of players. However, in his 154-second long segment on tacticians, he only spent 3 seconds saying what he loved about them. Majority of that segment was about the negative tendencies of these players, what to look out for and how to deal with them. Kind of mixed signals, skewing on the unwelcoming side. If my wife thought to ask if there's a place for leaders in D&D, then surely others do too. Why do people dislike tacticians? The many stories I've come across point to these so-called tacticians displaying a lack of skill. Move your character for you, skill issue. Nag you to get their way, skill issue. Berate you for making a suboptimal choice, skill issue. When an actor is unskilled at acting, they may bring you a weekly supply of cringe. When a tactician is unskilled at leading, they can seem like assholes. Cringe and assholery can both make games hell, but I dare say tolerance for assholery is a lot lower, and these unskilled leaders have given tacticians a bad name. My fellow adventurers in agility, if you identify the tendencies of a tactician in yourself, I want you to know that you could be so valuable to a group, but you need to work a bit more on skill with people, not just with the game system. You just, TM, need to ensure that you're a good leader. Unfortunately, unlike your power gamer cousins who have a wealth of resources available to them regarding optimizing their character builds, I've not really seen a lot of resources aimed at tacticians who want to get better at their craft, at least not in a D&D context. So here's me trying to contribute to our collective toolbox as players. First, let me try to clean away all the grime around the word leader. A leader doesn't need to be the boss. A leader is simply someone who gets a group of people to act cohesively towards a common objective. Everyone in a collaborative game like Dungeons & Dragons has a chance to exercise leadership, not just so-called tacticians. Leadership is just a job that someone has to do, and being a leader does not make you inherently better or the other players inherently less than. In Matt's video, he says tacticians like to plan, but it doesn't mean that they're good at it, or that the other players enjoy it. Therefore, to be a good tactician, you must come up with good plans and generate buy-in from other players. How do you come up with good plans? Ideally, you have a good grasp of the rules of your game system. But even if you had every rule and mechanic memorized, that's not enough. D&D is not a video game where everything is predetermined. Therefore, in addition to the game system, you should know about these things that change depending on your game group. Your party of PCs, your playmates as people, and the campaign style and objective. A Sailboat Retrospective or Futurespective, if you're just starting, is a great tool to help you brainstorm and organize the information. Draw a sailboat with sails full of wind, an anchor trailing behind, the sun shining overhead, dangerous rocks along the path, and finally, an island that is the destination. The island is the goal. Are you sure you know it? The sails and the wind behind it represent the strengths of your group. What pushes your group forward? The anchor refers to the group's weaknesses, what slows it down or can bring it to a halt. The rocks are supposed to be the risks and dangers along the way. And finally, the sun stands for what the group enjoys and makes the game fun. What brings positive feelings? Write down a few ideas for each item. Of these, your notes for goal and rocks should primarily be campaign related. What is the main campaign objective and what are the challenges you can foresee while you play it? Your ideas for the sun should be player focused. Knowing how to make your playmates feel good will go a long way in influencing them. The anchors and sails should be a mix of PC and actual player focused ideas. Do this periodically and you will have a guide that will help you make plans when you need to. Here's an example. The goal of your campaign is to defeat Demogorgon. When you think of the sails, you think you've got a Twilight Cleric that gives a ton of extra HP and recovery. You have a wizard with lots of control options that target multiple saving throws. You have a Sword and Board Paladin Warlock that offers big burst damage potential, especially against fiends, and is very tanky for the front line. And you have a very stealthy rogue for scouting, lockpicking, and disarming traps. On the actual player side, you realize that the Paladin player is very enthusiastic and supportive, and you, as the Cleric player, are following an optimized build guide. When you think of the anchors, you realize that your party is lacking in sustained damage since no one has feats like Great Weapon Master or Sharpshooter. Your damage and healing are dependent on very limited resources, and the wizard does not have proficiency nor advantage in concentration checks. The rogue player is new to D&D and still not familiar with all of the rules. The wizard player is playing a concept of a wizard who will never take Resilient Constitution or Warcaster. Not ever. The paladin gets easily bored, and the DM does not like these metagame conversations during combat. This has caused conflicts because you have a tendency to offer tips to other players in between turns. Note that these are just observations and not moral judgments of the people in your group. It's not wrong that the wizard does not want to protect their concentration. It's not bad that the DM does not like metagame conversations. These are just the realities for your specific group. More on this later. When you get to the rocks, you think that the party is susceptible to charm or mind control effects because the paladin, the wizard, and the rogue have low wisdom. If you're out of your Twilight Sanctuary uses, things could get hairy. And finally, when you think of the sun, you realize that the wizard player really enjoys being able to play their concept, flaws and all. The paladin player loves action and role-playing. They love dealing big damage. The rogue likes thinking outside of the box and they love to share their ideas. And the DM loves immersion and they appreciate it when their players really act their characters out. Why do you need to think of all these things? Can't you just identify something that you think is wrong and then act on that? Imagine identifying that the wizard has weak concentration and just telling them, hey, you better pick up Resilient Constitution or Warcaster next ASI, not knowing that they were actually playing a concept. You just alienated a teammate and contributed to the Tactician's bad name. To be a good leader, you need to have a holistic understanding of your group. From this, you can identify things that are negotiable and can be changed, and non-negotiable that have to be accepted and worked with. Trying to bulldoze through non-negotiables is asshole behavior and will turn the table against you. So now that you have this holistic view, what do you do about it? Immediately you can identify some things that you yourself can do to introduce improvements to your team. What do I mean by this? For example, you've identified that you have the tendency to offer tips to other players between turns. You share your thoughts strategically out of game. You've observed that the DM does not like it and calls it metagaming because it doesn't happen within the game. You've also noticed that sometimes your fellow players feel like you're being an overbearing general. What can you do about it? As a tactician, you know that this is part of your nature. It's not enough to just say you'll stop talking or offering tips, because then you will be unhappy. But what if, during the next hard encounter, what you do is include a call to action as part of your PC's turn? I move in front of the wizard to shield him from the enemy's barrage that try to break his concentration. I call upon my god and extend their Twilight Sanctuary to me and my friends. Rogue! That archer is aiming for wizard. If he drops his spell, we are dead. You're the only one who can take them out. I'll cover you. Now you've made your thoughts known by role-playing, which your DM likes. You've stopped pushing your agenda at the end of your turn, which makes your party more comfortable than you nagging them until they finally do it your way. Instead of getting in conflict with your wizard about his non-negotiable and, in your opinion, suboptimal choices, you've done something to cover for it and make it matter in the game. And you've set an objective, you said why it's important, and you let your rogue teammate decide if they will deal with it and how. In my opinion, this is leadership. You could have only come up with this course of action if you knew your table. I need to make a disclaimer. This quote-unquote improvement example about talking in character during combat, it's not an objective good. It's only good for the specific table that we analyzed. What works for one does not necessarily work for others, so the main takeaway should be to first spend the time getting to know your table using the Sailboat Retrospective or Futurespective. I've focused on the player perspective so far, but clever DMs who have characterized their tables in similar ways can make use of it to improve their games too. Want your players to think outside the box? Present them with a challenge that neutralizes their strengths. Want to make a tense encounter? Lean into the player's weaknesses. How can you do so while keeping your game enjoyable? Exploit what your players find fun when you create obstacles for them. Going back to the player perspective, let's take another example. Say your DM gave you a pretty long adventuring day. Your resources are all spent, so the lack of sustained damage is now making fights harder. You notice the paladin player say, "Damn, without spell slots I do almost no damage," and you feel your well of opinions about to overflow. What do you do? If your answer is to tell them, "That's what you get for blowing your entire load early in the day," then you obviously acted like an asshole. Remember how I said being a leader does not mean you're inherently better than your teammates? You just acted like you were on a higher rung of an imaginary hierarchy. Good luck with that. If your answer is to talk to them after the game session and say, "Hey, I noticed you like big damage. Have you considered using Great Weapon Master instead of Sword and Board? That extra 10 damage may make you feel good even if you're not smiting. Then maybe you can get somewhere. This moves us to the second part of being a good tactician, generating buy-in. Just because you think you know the best move to make doesn't mean that you actually do, or that your teammates will follow your thinking. But since the script is already getting quite long, I leave this to a future video. If you want me to go deeper into generating buy-in from your fellow players, be sure to let me know. Send this to the tacticians that you love, and more so to the tacticians that you don't. Hey, I'm Jarek, a dungeon master with a hobby in agile project management. If you have any questions, please leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. If you liked what I brought, please like the video. Appreciate it if you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll know when I drop the next one.